And so I left it to him, and I was like, you're supposed to make me happy. You're supposed to engage with me. I'm supposed to feel, fulfilled with our relationship. And he was like, no, friend, that's not how this works. And he was right. Like, I had to find my own thing. But for so long, if I'm so worried about everybody else, then I don't have to worry about myself. And that is easy, because then you're not responsible for making yourself happy. The problem, though, is I think there definitely comes a time, whether you're 30, whether you're 70, whatever it be, where now it's once again your responsibility to make yourself happy. And if you don't know, then you're just almost aimless.
Hey, yo, how's it going, everybody? This is Ideal from the Ideal Mentality Podcast, and today I have a very dear friend for a Day in the Life series, and I want to introduce her, or allow her to introduce herself. But this is Rosie, and Rosie, I know you because you are married. You're in town from Denver, and always very accommodating when I go out there, and I always appreciate it. And I want to say, I believe y'all are goals for a lot of things. Like, I admire y'all. I admire y'all. I'll get into why I admire y'all, but I wanted to just what is important about you these days that you're comfortable sharing? Like, what should people know about, like, what you do for a living, that sort of thing?
Sure. So like you said, been in Denver now for 10 and a half years. We moved over there pretty quickly when we started our relationship. I've had a 15-year career in finance and lending and banking. I did a brief hiatus in nonprofit fundraising, but definitely missed the lending side and missed the, type A personality kind of that comes with it. Yeah. So that's where my heart really lies, is in that.
Gotcha.
We have 3 great dogs. We love Denver. We love the, activities that come with it. Also have family in El Paso, so my heart's there. Always torn between the two. Born and raised in El Paso. Have family both in Juarez and El Paso. And yeah, I mean, we are expecting our first child at the age of 39 in about 7 months. So that's really exciting.
And that's huge.
And that's going to be very different. So a lot of life changes coming down that path as well. But yeah, I mean, we've had to build our life out of town and our own relationship out of town. And honestly, I think it's been the best blessing that we could have ever had.
And that's, I mean, a lot of that encapsulates why I admire y'all so much. I think I've always wanted to have the big city living, definitely from a small town, saying it that way. But, just being able to pursue your dreams, being able to pursue a lot of those things, and you've taken routes that are, looking out for what's important to you and to the greater good. So, whether it's the way that y'all live out there in Denver and take care of business and handle yourselves and the health of your relationship, just all of that. I just, I look up to it. And awesome. I just want to make that clear. So
that's very sweet.
Yeah.
I mean, we've been very blessed in that regard, because since we were dating 6 months and we moved out there, and I just kind of had gotten an opportunity. So when we started dating, asked him if he wanted to come. He said, sure, why not? I mean, it could have gone very sideways because I barely knew this person, but I knew his heart was gold. And he was starting out his career there too. So Denver's really served us in also building just who we are as professionals.
Yeah.
But then also, like I said, having to rely on each other. And, you can't have a fight and run away and go to your family. No, you have to sit and talk it out. And that's hard. Talk about, emotional growth. But that brought its own challenges too. And talking about having different cultural influences, in the Hispanic culture, it's very enmeshed and everybody's in your business. But out there, he's my family and he's my everything. So, we work it out, and it's been really good for us. And I've been really lucky just to have him in my corner.
Nice. And
yeah.
You and, for the sake of this podcast, I also admire both of you for the reflection you do on yourselves and the work you do on yourselves. And that's its own journey. And I
Yeah.
wanted to ask, like, what themes can we touch on today?
I think a lot of the big lessons that we've learned, or that I've learned personally in various different ways, is a big one is you have to make yourself happy, in the sense that it's very easy to just identify yourself as the relationship. But at the end of the day, I loved him for who he was before he was mine. And so to keep the relationship also energized and, content, you have to make yourself happy. It is no one else's job to do that. And if you're not happy, it's not his job to make you happy, or her job. You got to, figure out what's important to me. So that's a big one that, I've kind of taken. It plays into a few of the difficulties I've had when it comes to codependency, when it comes to, being accommodating to people that maybe aren't accommodating to you. So yeah, owning your own happiness is a big one. What other lessons? Working through it, having those hard conversations, working on your own self-evolution, working on your own self-discovery. Those hard conversations are really hard sometimes. And I kind of picked this up too, where, the questions should always be, is it more important to be loving or is it more important to be right? And my value, being a kind person, that's one of my big values, being kind in general. And so loving all day long should always, in my experience, should be the dominant thing, not always being right. But I could be super righteous when I want to be. Yeah. So that's another struggle too. It's always an ongoing thing. And we work through it, and I accept him for everything he is. And I know he accepts me just as I am, and he lets me be that. And even when he doesn't agree with it, he still hears me. And that's a big thing. I like to be heard versus hushed, because I come from a very macho home that would hush you.
Gotcha.
So, things like that, we've learned to complement each other. And I always wonder, would we have learned that if we were enmeshed in the family? If I was completely distracted with other things and influenced by other things, would I have learned a lot of these lessons on my own? Or would have that family member said, forget him, and then I would have just dropped it?
Yeah.
So, there's a lot of what ifs in that. But it's always, been the relationship's always been, how can we show up for each other? Not how do you show up for me?
And it'd be very ironic of me to have this podcast in the context of your relationship, given the conversations about codependency, right?
Yeah. So
let me ask, when did you independently realize that boundaries were a thing?
So long story short, to not spend too much time on this, I ended up having the beginnings of an autoimmune illness. I had just severe allergies, constant hives. My body was like screaming at me. It would just get angry, like just red. I couldn't figure it out. No, all these doctors wanted to give me all this medicine. I was very much an advocate for myself, and I'm very logical, and they would tell me things and I would say, no, why am I going to take medication to shut down my immune system? That sounds dangerous. And so I really became an advocate for myself. And I spent 2 to 3 years really solidly researching this, trying to get in front of it. I'm a little controlling, as you can tell. And then there was a year, I think it was like the 3rd or 4th year, where I decided to go to counseling. So I was like, maybe there's a component here. They keep saying I'm stressed. I don't feel stressed. I feel extremely calm. I don't think I'm wigged out. I meditate, I go on walks. And I started to go to counseling, and a lot started kind of coming up because I allowed it to. I've also gone to counseling in the past. My mother passed, and it was just to get over the grief. But I never really dug deeper into being accountable for, why am I here? Like, what's my reason for coming to you today? It was just, my mom's passed and it's really hard. Now it's like, okay, counselor, this is what I want to talk about. This is what I'm really trying to work through. And I know there's not going to be an aha moment, but if I could just kind of stay on a path that's lit up, I feel like I can grow. And that's kind of what's happened. So as this counseling came up, my codependency started coming up a lot. My need to be needed, my need to feel like I have value to somebody.
Yeah.
And then not speaking up for myself. Honestly, the big thing that has helped me health-wise is actually speaking up for myself. Obviously we did a few other things. I, was on really rigorous diets. I was on really rigorous, lifestyle changes. But the big one too was also learning to just let go of all this bitterness and this resentment that I had carried. And I think my body carried. And I very much believe the body keeps the score. I read that book and it's fantastic. And your body holds these things. And it was holding this energy. So as I opened it up and I allowed myself to be vulnerable and to actually be accountable now for myself, yeah, all these things came out. It's nice to label them, but also I don't want to get stuck on the label. But it helped me say, all right, let's Google, ways that help with codependency, ways that help with trauma responses, ways that help with attachment, attachment
styles.
Yes. And all those types of things, and just learn more about myself to understand myself. Because if I can't understand myself, how am I going to expect somebody else to? And how am I going to know what to ask for when it comes to a boundary? But like I was mentioning, I didn't even know what boundaries look like. No was not an option. With my mom, she was strong and beautiful, but also incredibly bossy, and she had her own business, and no was not an option. Rosie, I need to go do this. Okay. You need to go do that. I don't want to, but okay. And I did a lot that I didn't want to do. I had to always perform. I always had to make people happy. I always had to make people feel engaged. It did not help that she had an entertainment business. So I was literally an entertainer, making kids happy, making the parents happy, the kids are happy. That was my job for, 12, 13 years every weekend. So it gets ingrained in you. You have no value if people aren't happy with you. Once again, you get good girl syndrome in that. You get codependency with that. You get a lot of other things that your value is tied to everybody else. And then I have no reason to have boundaries because I'm just worried about everybody else.
Until it becomes what seems like a life or death situation where you have to speak up for yourself. And then
and it was so
from
hard.
there it trickles down. It seems like it's trickling down,
to
from
a lot
there,
of things, yeah.
from health, advocating for health and like, let me speak up for myself. This doesn't seem right. I don't want those medicines. Something else is going on. And then now it's like, whoa, like there's other things going on related to me speaking up. Yeah. Related to me speaking up, full stop.
Correct. And I mean, I've had to adjust my social circle. I've had to adjust my work situation. And I mean, it's trial and error. There have been teams that I join and I'm like, this does not line up with me. But I would have never known that if I didn't know my values, if I didn't know what lines with me. I wouldn't know that this team is not good for me or this relationship's not good for me because all I was worried about was you. And I think it's really easy to do that. It's definitely a scapegoat because then I don't have to worry about my happiness and I don't have to take responsibility for my happiness. And like I said, I learned probably during COVID, actually. I was struggling with COVID because we weren't socializing a lot. We were stuck at home. Gabe was in heaven because he's an introvert in his room doing his graphic designs and I didn't have the engagement. And so I left it to him and I was like, you're supposed to make me happy. You're supposed to engage with me. I'm supposed to feel, fulfilled with our relationship. And he was like, no, friend, that's not how this works. And he was right. Like I had to find my own thing. But for so long, if I'm so worried about everybody else, then I don't have to worry about myself. And that is easy because then you're not responsible for making yourself happy. The problem though, is I think there definitely comes a time, whether you're 30, whether you're 70, whatever it be, where now it's once again your responsibility to make yourself happy. And if you don't know, then you're just almost aimless. And I think that's where you kind of get into that like freeze trauma response. You just sit and you numb and you watch TV and you do whatever.
Escape.
And you just don't live your life because frankly, you don't know what you want because it was always based on somebody else. And that's what I was trying to avoid. Even in parenthood. I mean, I know a lot of people put a lot of their effort in making the kid happy, but how's the kid going to learn happiness if you're not happy? And how are they going to learn how to make themselves happy if they're not seeing it reflected in you? And that's what I'm really afraid of is that if I can't continue to build myself and grow, how am I going to teach my child to do that? Because he's just going to say, oh, well, mom does everything for me because my mom did that. And I almost got resentful that like you sacrificed everything, but you also sacrificed me being able to see and look up to you.
Just a shell.
Yeah. And there came a time where I started helping her with her business and I kind of started to see some of those, some of that, glossy facade break down. And then she became human. And I was like, this is weird. Like, I always thought you had it all together. But there's a lot of gaps here and you're not wanting to work on them. And it was a weird relationship transition. So I'm really hoping in my parent situation that we can find a way to find that happy medium with that. And hopefully raise a pretty decent human being in the process. So, but it's a big responsibility and it's super scary.
Oh, it's definitely... Becoming a parent's definitely super scary. And, there's semi-transparency you can give. You know what I mean?
Sure.
I'm aware that I'm struggling with this. And I'm aware you're going to struggle a little bit with it too because you're watching me struggle with it. But let's learn how to do it together.
Sure.
And then holding... you had asked me earlier about compassion and like grace. With things. Mm-hmm. You need a ton of that as a parent,
With yourself too.
And holding and talk about holding space, being able to hold that space for yourself, holding that space for them. And it's a little bit more space to hold because you're holding it for them and so they can hold it for themselves. What you have in your favor is reflective capacities, self-awareness.
Thank you.
Which, our parents may or may not have had.
Sure.
Or maybe they had it and they didn't care about taking it further. Yeah, that's who I am.
Yeah.
Kind of mentality.
I almost wonder if that generation, that baby boomer generation, the image was very important. The 1950s white picket fence, everything is fine. We have the latest car. Our family looks happy. We're all presentable. I feel like that was really important, that to be self-reflective would have to admit that you don't have that together. And that was a cultural thing in America, I feel. Obviously different in Hispanics, in other Latin countries. But I almost wonder if there's that influence too, where you couldn't reflect. And counseling wasn't a thing, it wasn't as acceptable. There's jokes even about how my son's not depressed. He just likes to sit in the dark. Like,
Yeah.
So it's kind of been interesting to see how it evolves now and where we're at.
Now, culture's played a big part. We've talked about with working through some like codependency and that sort of thing, because of gender roles and knowing that, I don't know, I guess you can argue that in an emotional space, women hold a lot of that emotional space too much for everyone else, not so much for themselves. And then men, I'm not even sure how we'd characterize men in that regard, because machismo kind of attitudes don't allow for expression of emotion beyond anger, probably. But how would you view that?
So, excuse me. As I mentioned, I do have a sister who has a PhD in industrial psychology. She's doing a lot of research on cultural scripts, especially the Hispanic ones. And there's 7 of them, I believe. Don't quote me on that, though. But one of the big ones, though...
Quote that. Rosie says there's 7 cultural scripts. Write that down.
Forever, on the record. One of the big ones, though, is Marianismo, which is the woman's role to kind of play that Mary role, where you are very tending to everybody. You're the person that stays at work and starts the coffee, and you're the person that, stays after and picks up the, things. And, you're always worried about everybody else. And that is very much part of the culture. The mother is the one that eats last. The mother is the one who, eats her cold food. She's the one that sits down last. She's, you have to serve everybody else before you serve yourself. If you don't serve your husband, you're a terrible wife. Like, a lot of that type of thing. It was very common for them to stay at home and raise children. How can you not have children? What's wrong? So I think that had a big influence. And so then women are obviously normally the ones that are maintaining the household and tending to the men. And so I think it creates this weird kind of power dynamic. And that's not the case with all. I definitely don't want to generalize it, but I do think it is a big part of the culture. And that's part of the machismo side too, where you do have that patriarch, where you do have that strong male, figure where their word is the last word. They eat first. They sit at the head of the table. My dad, God bless him. I mean, I asked him to say please when he wanted a fork, and he got so mad at me. I said, I need a fork now. And I said, say please. I mean, I was like 12 and sassy, so watch out. And he got so mad, he got up and got his own fork just so he wouldn't have to say please. And that's macho. Like, that's pride. And if you're raising a house of 3 young women and a wife, I mean, that's a weird power dynamic too. So becoming the good girl, making everybody happy, like I said, my mother was in an entertainment business. So then we would be expected to sing at Christmas because it made everybody
layered,
happy.
Right? I mean,
there's a lot.
Just the cultural expectations, but being in a family dynamic where the business is literally pleasing other people. I mean, deeply ingrained stuff, right?
Yeah. Can I entertain a group of people? Can I stand in front of a crowd of 500 people and on a microphone and very comfortably manage myself? Absolutely. Can I tell somebody that doesn't make me happy? I don't like that when you talk to me. Even to this day, it's super hard. I had a friend that wanted to rearrange my furniture, and I was literally having like anxiety attack while she was doing it, but I couldn't tell her no. I couldn't say, no, I like my furniture, leave it alone. She kept saying, how about we try this? And I was like, okay. And I would tell her, like, just cringing, I don't like that. And then she just tried something else. For me not to be able to give her that clear direction was unfair. And I know that.
Yeah.
But I also was raised in an environment where, you know, being a good girl is how you get love. And making everybody happy, you know, and you impressing people with how great of a student you are, or, you know, what an amazing job you did in this organization or that organization. I mean, that's how you got value, and that's what you brought to value. And so I think that's still a good lesson. I'm not saying it's not. I'm just saying there has to be a balance. And that's my big thing right now is what's the balance to this? I do believe in the balance of energy. I do believe in the universe checks those balances. I do believe there's a God, but I don't think it's this, you know, judgmental man in the sky. And so the question is, what's the balance? Yes, it's good to help people. Yes, it's good to please people, but don't also lose yourself in that process. And I have to now be aware of what is my body telling me? You know, when I get now certain pains in my back, certain pains in my neck, when my stomach is like cringing, clearly my body doesn't like this. This is against something I value, and I have to sit with it. What does that feel like? What does that mean? What is it that's making me feel this way?
Reverse engineer your
Absolutely.
bodily reactions to figure out, well, where.
Because
like,
you
I
can
know
get so
this
stuck.
is something coming from something I believe or something I don't like, but I don't really know exactly what it is. So but that becomes difficult because in the moment you might need to speak up on what it is, but you got to reflect, and it's work.
And I love my relationship with Gabe because he lets me walk things back. Once again, another thing is you can't make mistakes because you have to be perfect. In this Hispanic family, you know, you have to be the good girl. And so making mistakes is not allowed. And I mean, that's not life. And I think from a lot of what I'm learning and a lot of this type of like self-regulation, it's okay to make that mistake. And it's okay to come back and say, man, I really lost my temper. I'm so sorry. I didn't show up my best today. You know, this is what's going on, but I will do better. And that has to be okay, because how do we grow? And that was the difference between believing in a growth mentality and a static mentality. You know, if I can't make mistakes, then I can't grow. And if I'm going to refuse to make mistakes, then I'm going to sit in the static spot and I'm going to forever be this way, which clearly my body is not happy about. You know, these hives are not quiet. They hurt. They were loud. They were hot. Like my body was angry. And so Gabe has allowed me to do that. You know, if I say, I don't like what you just said, I'm going to just process that. I'll be right back. And then I process it. And, you know, even if I raise my voice, which I do very easily, and I'm very impassioned of a person, you know, I can come back and say, all right, I'm sorry. I'm ready to talk about it. That wasn't the best way to do that. I'm trying to implement that now at work. I'm trying to implement that now with people. But yeah, if I can't make a mistake and you still love me, then this is not a secure relationship. And so I'm having to like make those types of boundaries.
Gotcha.
And that's a lot. That's a lot. You have to be willing to let people go for that. But at least I found a value that I'm going to stick to. Being kind is one of them. Being brave is another.
Yeah.
Growing is another. Like, this is important to me. And it took me a while to even label those, you know?
I think it's something I've been wondering about. There's an irony to self-work when it comes to codependency, I suppose, and self-love. Because I wonder if it can fall too deep into the idea of I need to be a certain way to love myself. You know what I mean? Like, where are boundaries on self-work? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, well, at what point do we accept there's certain things about ourselves that are imperfect and still lovable?
I think that's the interesting part of the cultural influence is that self-work I think our culture thinks it's selfish. Like, if you're not thinking, because we are talking about cultural scripts once again, familismo is another one. The family is the important thing. The unit is important. You do things for the family. You move away. What about the family? I didn't leave until my grandmother passed because how am I not going to be there for her? Like, what if something happened? And that familismo, it's very immersed and it's a beautiful thing, but you also no longer do things for you. You do it for the tribe. You do it for the group. Oh, yeah. Throw in Catholicism. Oh, my God. Mom was an amazing, like, you know, bleeding heart. She was always like the guilt writer of it all. And at the end of the day, that's also another thing you have to stand up against and say, no, self-care is how I show up for you. Self-care is how I'm my best self when I'm with you, and I can make space and I can meet you where you're at because I met myself, and I just met my inner child. And I wouldn't have been able, I can't show up for you if I'm not there for me. It's kind of like the airplane thing. Like you have to put your oxygen mask on first before you put on your kids. Yeah. That's bizarre. Why wouldn't you put your kids on first? You need to be able to breathe before you can make sure that she's okay or he's okay. And I think it's the same thing. Like in our culture, it is very selfish to get into counseling. And it's silly. It's looked down on. Hence the machismo influence.
And statistics say Latino males don't last very long in therapy. It's like 3 or 4 sessions.
I could totally see that. But you also, and I, have family members that are very, don't believe in therapy. But I also, like I said, it's like anything. You put in it what you get out of it, what you put in it. And so, like I said, I'll go to therapy and I say, this is the emotion I'm working through. I confuse my relationships because I have 2 different emotions all the time and I'm not always open. Can we talk through that? I'm not sure where that comes from.
Yeah.
And but I do that. And I had to tell my therapist, you're being too nice. You need to be harder on me. And I don't think she's mean, but I don't think she was challenging me enough. And I wanted the challenge. I want you to say, Rosie, why do you think that? Rosie, where's that coming from? Is that serving you? Instead of just you listening to me and saying, okay, well, we'll see you next week. I don't know where this is going. Like, that's also a little controlling. I understand that, but I'm paying $100, sometimes $200 at a time. And so I want to make sure this is going to be worth that. But I do think back to what you're saying, the irony is it can be very selfish, but I do also think it depends on how you look at it. And in my situation, even for my family, if I can't, breathe right with my oxygen mask on, I'm definitely not gonna be able to help you with yours.
Yeah. And not necessarily selfish, but is there a stopping point for self-work? You know what I mean?
I don't think so.
At what point do we accept, I think I've stepped far enough away from this cycle and, becoming a parent is like my child will take a few more steps away from me. I think that's something that I've been wondering and wrestling with is, is this constant need for self-improvement driven purely by the right principles, Where do we find a place to just be comfortable with who we are and accept that is a place? And is there any part of that that's tied to difficulties loving ourselves in a different direction? Does that make sense?
And I think back to what I'm saying, I think it depends on what you value. If you are going for a specific purpose and you think that's the only thing that really needs work, then yeah, your journey can be done at a certain point. I have a family member who, he was like, I went to counseling, I'm fine. And I'm like, friend, this journey doesn't end. Because the things that, like you had mentioned to me before and informed me of, these protective mechanisms that establish these belief systems, this idea that I'm not good enough unless I'm making people happy.
Yeah.
I can, take care of that inner child, ease that, but it's always going to get triggered one way or another. And I think there's some, ideas that go so deep that you don't even realize how much they're controlling your own narrative. I'm not good enough. I can't go for that job. I'm not smart enough. I'm not going to ask for a raise. Where did that come from? Who told you one day that you weren't and you accepted that because you needed to accept that? But is that still serving you? And I do think that these things pop up.
Yeah.
Even to, what we were saying earlier, I do think adult counseling will always be talking about your childhood because those were the survival mechanisms that you needed during this really important time to survive. And I think any young species, you're the most vulnerable. Yeah. So survival is vital.
Yeah.
And yet they're going to keep creeping up. And I think they'll show up in different ways. But if you value, this is where I'm at, I really like this, that's great. I just know I value and my husband values growth. And I think there's always better ways to show up. And there's better ways to just get a little bit better at this time. And I notice that tends to be the people I attract or that I want to be around because I believe that.
That's fair.
I have a friend who's a horse trainer and I'm like, don't you kind of get a little bored? And he's like, no, because tomorrow we're going to now work on the right lead. And then the day after we're going to work on the left lead. And then the day after I'm going to get a little bit better at this. And it's just that constant challenge. If that's your value. I don't want to say that that's everybody's. And that's okay that it's not. But I do think that if you think you're done, you might realize that you have more work to do once you get triggered again by something. And they always say a trigger is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just information that you're still hurting somewhere. And there's still something that needs to be reconciled, or at least just tended to. A lot of these scars go deep, and they're beautiful because they're who they made. They are why you are who you are, but they also come with a lot of emotion that I think is really uncomfortable to be around.
That's fair.
So, and my answer to you, at least for me personally, is I don't think the journey ever ends. I don't know. I'll probably be a very different person 20, 30 years from now. But, I mean, who are we if we're not moving and growing? That's who we are as a species.
I guess at 50, like I was telling you, I think I'd like to just stop. Like, because I think sometimes the inner work can threaten inner peace sometimes.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
And at one point, I just want to feel inner peace. And you know what? Like, I am blunt and I'm impulsive sometimes. And, you know, some people have loved me for 30, 40 years this way. I'm going to love myself at this point this way. I'm going to try and teach my son a little better, but go from there. And I guess, like, in looking forward for you, what do you think are the next important steps for you in your journey?
I'm trying to get better at saying, this is who I am. Love me as I am. Flaws and all, because they make me better. And like to what you're saying, I totally look forward to, 60, 70 years old, because you really don't care. And this is who you are, wrinkles and bumps and lumps and, everything. And my answer and my family, I mean, the older generation is the most fun. And I love to hang out with their friends because this is who they are. Yeah. I mean, this is who I am. And there's no more pretense. There's
no give a damn. It's just, let's deal with each other as is and go forward.
I mean, if we can get that at the age of 39, that'd be great. And that's the circle I want to be in. And that's what a lot of my friends are like. I have one that, bless his heart, he will walk 20 feet in front of you no matter where you go. And I'm like, what are you doing? You're leaving me behind. He's like, I got places to go. Why aren't you with me? And I mean, some people could think that's rude. Yeah. I think it's hilarious because I accept him for who he is. And I think just getting into relationships like that, being surrounded by people that accept you as you are, I'm impassioned. I can be a little combative. I can be very forthcoming and direct. That makes people uncomfortable. I like to immediately go into deep conversations. That makes people uncomfortable. I cover a lot of it up with humor. Like, this is who I am. Yeah. And if I'm doing it right and I'm on the journey right, then that's something that can be celebrated as well as encouraged to be better.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm aiming for.
Just having that circle around you that has the understanding that you're coming from a good place with whatever you're coming with and allowing you to grow from that place in due time.
Yeah. And I think in time, just like, like grief, like anything, in the beginning, it's intense. And in time, those waves go out and they come in a little more, less frequently. But I do think there'll be triggers down the road that once again, I'm like, oh, okay. I was coasting for a while. I was doing good. I was loving myself. I was putting my boundaries. I got my values. And then something triggered me or something came up that then makes me once again have to do some self-work. Yeah. It's maintenance. Everything's maintenance. Budget's maintenance. Cars are maintenance. Yeah. And I think self-care is maintenance. Nutrition is maintenance. Yeah. To think that you are, lost 30 pounds and you're done? No. I mean, you could gain it back very easily. Yeah. Can I go to counseling and be done? You could, but you might revert because you forgot, once again, what you were aiming for. Yeah. So I do think it's maintenance. But the goal is to get to that point where you're just so comfortable that when it's time for maintenance, you're ready for it. And you accept it and you take care of it. And then you keep moving forward with the people that love and support you.
That makes sense.
That's the goal.
Yeah.
I think it gets easier the older we get.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, when you're...
habits and patterns.
Yeah. When you're 17, the things that are important are crazy. It's so superficial and so hard and so socially, grueling because you're constantly trying to prove your worth. You're constantly trying to fit in. I hope by 50 or 40, I don't have to worry about that anymore. That's fair. I will, but to only certain extents.
Yeah. I think on that note, I mean, it's nice to have this interview as a recorded documentation in time of, the maybe a little bit of the parenting anxiety as you move into that zone. Yeah. But also for you to look back and realize it's valid. That parenting anxiety is valid, but you got this. You both got this. And, you're going to be just fine. So, I appreciate the time that you've given the new journey that you're on in life with becoming parents.
Thanks.
You've provided a lot of value to me, and that's why I was so ecstatic to share with you. Like, sold my car today. I got my emergency fund up because you've helped with my budget and all of that. And again, like just individuals, each of you individually in different ways that I admire, but then together as a relationship goals also with meeting my girlfriend today. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Everything just kind of aligned today. So I just want to share, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your journey with me. And I'm hoping that this conversation, because I know it can be different in certain spaces for women to share their stuff because of men, you know, and society. But I'm hoping that this can kind of allow for others to maybe come and share their journey from the female perspective.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's fantastic. I really do think this approach and just hearing these stories of representation, like you're saying, of other people's experiences and seeing yourself in them and understanding you're not alone, I think is huge. And what you're doing here is fantastic. And I mean, we're just as blessed to have you in our life too. I'm always like, is it bad if I text Ideal and ask him a therapist question? And Gabe's like, I don't know. And I'm like, but I mean, will we still be friends? Like, will he be mad at me? So, I mean, what you can contribute is just really helpful, but allowing other stories to be heard, I mean, there's nothing better than that. So
well,
thank you.
I appreciate you. No problem. Thank you for your time today. That'll be it for the Ideal Mentality podcast. I appreciate everyone for listening. This will be released sometime soon. I got to push myself to do that. And when you see this, just let me know how you like it or not. Peace.
Thanks.